can feel my body hold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, looks at me deceiving. Let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. So put your hand in mine, follow me, let me waste your time. Set up feet, do some stupid shit. Take a seat, let me waste your time. So put your
we have two amazing lawyers that I'm looking forward to hearing what they've got to say. One is a new friend and a now becoming a very good friend, Adam Lamborello, and of course a longtime person has been involved in both legal and finance world, that being Peter Bennett. But I'm going to bring these two gentlemen up and turn it over to them because I am not a lawyer and don't even play one on TV. So I'll bring you two fine folks up, and I understand y'all going to be talking about habeas corpus, but I'm going to get out of the way and let y'all have this deep conversation here on The Lawyer's Den.
Thanks, Mark. Good. Adam?
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here. How are you doing, Peter?
Good.
So I guess I could just speak generally about habeas corpus, what it is. And basically, habeas corpus means you have the right to challenge your detention in the United States. It's called a collateral attack on a judgment of conviction. And there's many reasons why people file petitions for habeas corpus. It could be because there's a constitutional violation, for example, that occurred at their trial, such as a Fourth Amendment violation of the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, or the right to effective assistance of counsel under the Sixth Amendment. They're typically not successful, but they are available to both United States citizens and non-citizens.
Oh, very interesting. I didn't know that they were typically not successful because I don't do litigation on habeas corpus. So here's a fairly extensive background. The topic is habeas corpus for today's Lawyer's Den. So here's a definition, first of all. Habeas corpus is a fundamental legal procedure that ensures no one is imprisoned unlawfully. Sounds reasonable enough. It allows a person to challenge their detention in court by requesting a judge to order the custodian to bring the prisoner before the court. This allows the court to determine if the detention is lawful, and if not, the prisoner must be released. So to that point, doesn't sound very controversial, but now we begin on the controversy. So here's the take of the Detroit Free Press, which gives you one side of this argument, and because it's now become a very political argument, obviously. And judging from this, the Detroit Free Press is at least liberal on this issue and probably very liberal generally. And they said, President Donald Trump and his circle are charging full speed towards stripping Americans of their basic constitutional rights. Again, this is their take. President Donald Trump's senior advisor, Stephen Miller, has suggested, so he only suggested it, but okay, the administration is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus, a constitutional right dating back to the Magna Carta of 1215, designed to prevent unlawful detention. Historically, suspensions of habeas corpus have come during national emergencies. Lincoln invoked it during the Civil War. Roosevelt used it to justify Japanese internment camps during World War II. Both late decisions were later criticized by some for violating fundamental rights, or by many. But Trump's proposal comes without crisis or justification, only a desire to wield power without oversight. So that's their take. Now let's look at the other side. And this is from a more conservative court take, which isn't totally conservative, but Fox News leans right, clearly. So why is the Trump considering this now? The potential move comes amid the administration's frustration with federal judges who have blocked or slowed deportations and immigration enforcement efforts. Miller, who is the same person they cited in the Detroit Press article, accused courts of waging a, quote, war on both executive and legislative branches, citing a judge's intervention in the removal of individuals with temporary protective status and a Supreme Court ruling that ordered the government to return a deported Venezuelan man. Right-wing attorney Mehek, if I'm saying that right, Mehek, Cook argued that Donald Trump should suspend habeas corpus rights if the Supreme Court can, quote, cannot understand that he has the legal right to deport migrants without due process. So that's a pretty extensive background and two totally different takes on what's going on. One is saying, the rights of Americans will be decimated, and the other is saying this is necessary, especially if the courts get involved.
Sure.
At my conclusions, Adam, what do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, the statement that the White House is stripping Americans of basic constitutional rights is really, really an overstatement, an irresponsible one. There's about 10,000 habeas petitions filed per year. Only about 3.2% of them succeed. It's a very small number. Now, with regard to undocumented immigrants, the Supreme Court has held in cases like Hamdi versus Rumsfeld that due process protections apply both to U.S. citizens and non-citizens. So they are entitled to due process rights, which includes the collateral attack of habeas corpus. But there are exceptions. There's exceptions in cases of expedited removal. When someone has been here and they're undocumented, been here for less than 2 years, then they're not entitled to due process. And in certain exigent circumstances where it's appropriate to dispense with due process. But those are limited exceptions. So given that framework, the question is, does Trump's conduct fall within either of these exceptions? And you have to adjudicate that on a case-by-case basis.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. We've been discussing due process a lot in the last few lawyers' dens because that is really part of where we're going. What due process does an illegal immigrant have? Do they get an expedited hearing or a very minimal due process? Or, some people make it sound like they're entitled to a full court protections as an American citizen would be. People who are put on death row, rightfully or wrongfully, I have mixed feelings about that, but they can petition and appeal for 10 or 15 years. So if you have, let's say, 20 million illegal aliens, some people estimate that 15 million alien, that means nothing is happening forever, and the courts are jammed up when they're already jammed up with civil and criminal cases anyway. So that's it. There's a lot to be decided, that's for sure.
Yeah, what I'll say about that is that when it comes to deciding due process or what process is due, it depends on the context. If you're, for example, charged with a crime and you're facing the death penalty or life in prison, you are afforded extensive due process, a trial, a defense attorney if you need one. But not every deprivation requires the same level of due process. If you're fired from a governmental agency, for example, you're not entitled to a trial. You get a lesser degree of due process because the threat or the deprivation that you're facing is of less significance, and therefore the procedures are not going to be as extensive. In the case of undocumented immigrants, yes, they're entitled to due process rights, but they're very limited due process rights because the grounds upon which they can contest their removal are themselves very few. Either, for example, did the government make a mistake in declaring them undocumented, or is there some other reason, such as asylum, that they deserve that? But so, yes, they're entitled to due process, but not to such an extensive degree that you would see in cases where people are facing, for example, the death penalty or other more significant deprivations.
So that you did just now and also before raise an interesting question, which I didn't know. You said that illegal immigrants are entitled to get an expedited hearing within 2 years. But what if they're here 2 years and 2 days, or 3 years or 4 years? The current law is then they don't get any expedited hearing?
Okay, so they don't get an expedited hearing. What I was saying was that the government has the right to petition for an expedited removal and no due process procedures if the person has been here for less than 2 years.
But if beyond 2 years, then it gets more complicated based on previous law. But again, the Supreme Court is going to be deciding, along with the Trump administration, maybe the Congress, what hearings people are entitled to and what due process they're entitled to. But you're saying previously there was a 2-year line.
There was.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
And that's why a lot of the deportations, people, making these sweeping statements that Americans are being deprived of constitutional rights, or Trump is depriving all non-U.S. citizens of due process, is not accurate. You have to look at who is he deporting, and does it fall under one of the exceptions? And in many cases, it does.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That was clearly an exaggeration. So here's my two conclusions, because Lawyers Den only runs 15 minutes, then we have Wall Street Hackers following that. So one, the threat of suspending habeas corpus might only be a indication to the Supreme Court that the administration is frustrated with courts interfering with the immigration process and arguably defense security questions in an area usually left to the executive branch and Congress. And so it hasn't even happened yet. It might just be an indicator, but maybe they have a reasonable argument for suspending it. But in the end, by the way, it would be Congress who has the legal right to suspend habeas corpus. Trump administration can argue there's an invasion, and that's the second point. One of the key elements in their argument is, and this is debatable, there is no definition of invasion, but they are arguing that there is an invasion in the U.S. Again, 15, 20 million illegal immigrants and many are proven to be terrorists. We know many, not maybe tens of thousands, but there are many terrorists in that group that came across the border, known terrorists. And of course, many, many criminals. I didn't have a chance to look, but I assume it's certainly thousands, if not tens of thousands of criminals who are in there. So that could be argued to be an invasion. Again, this is a matter of opinion from a legal perspective. So a lot of this was caused by the last administration, obviously, who basically opened the borders wide open, was saying, we need an act of Congress to protect the borders. And then they were saying the borders are secure. Well, millions and millions of people were going over it. And that lie was disproved. I hate to use that word, but it was disproved, because within days of the Trump administration taking over, the border became almost absolutely secure. The numbers are tiny little numbers now, in the hundreds or whatever in a month, instead of tens of thousands of apprehensions. And so politics hits the judiciary and legal, and this is a perfect example. So hopefully in the end, I think the Supreme Court and the judiciary has to step away from a lot of these issues. I think they are clearly indication that there has to be some due process. But as you said, Adam, there has to be limited due process for those who aren't Americans, because they're not American citizens. And so it should be something like, prove that you should be here. Do you have a passport? Do you have a visa? Explain the mistake. And that's probably where they're going to wind up, because the courts, again, from a pure fundamental standpoint, do not have the capacity to start taking on these cases.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of takeaways. Number one, the actions by the executive are going to have to be considered, in light of the existing framework governing due process in this context. But the key here is, does Trump's interpretation of the statute that he classifies this as an invasion, how much deference will the Supreme Court give to the executive's determination that this is, whether it is an invasion or it is not? Because the issue of deference is going to be central to this, because if the court says, like it has for years until only recently, that agency decisions are entitled to substantial deference under the Chevron doctrine, well, if they do that here, then that's going to give the executive a tremendous amount of power. But if they intervene and they decide that it's quote unquote not an invasion under the statute, then you have the problem of maybe judicial overreach in these situations. So which way is the court going to go? I suspect 5-4 they're going to rule for Trump. Yeah,
I'm not sure, but it's always exciting. You never know, especially these days with divided Supreme Court, and we will see. But there are so many major issues the Supreme Court is dealing with now. So it will be an interesting term, that's for sure. Thanks for watching. Thank you for joining us, Adam. I think you'll be on next week, too.
All right. Great to be here. Have a great night.
See you soon.
I can feel my body hold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, look at me deceiving, let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me. So put your hand in mine, follow me, let me waste your time. Set up feet, do some stupid shit. Take a seat, let me waste your time. So put your
Well, I'm going to bring in the man that knows quite a bit about finance and all along those lines. It's time for the Wall Street Hacker, and I'm going to bring in the hacker himself, none other than Peter Bennett. And I've always been impressed by this show and his knowledge, so I'm looking forward to sitting back and learning a lot. So I'm going to bring in the man himself, Peter Bennett, who has definitely had some time working with folks in the finance sector and all along those lines. So glad to have you here, Peter, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. We'll see you for the panel discussion. So welcome to Wall Street Hackers, May 27th, 2025. You can catch a new episode of Wall Street Hackers most weeks, Tuesdays at 6:15 following Lawyer's Den, that's Eastern Standard Time, following Lawyer's Den, which goes on at about 6. So we never know exactly when Wall Street Hackers will go if we run a minute or two over on Lawyer's Den, or one week, 10 minutes. Anyway, we start with the markets. I was going to write about the effects of higher bond rates and what's going on with the bond market. As I've said before, the bond market and the stock market are kind of sending different signals. Historically, the bond market has been right, but who knows? But here's a quote of the week, which I always do anyway, and it's from Market Gauge this morning. And I thought it summed up a lot of the conflict between these two markets. So there are often multiple themes driving the market, but when there is primary underlying theme, it will take over. That was an interesting point itself. I'll be discussing some of these points later. The most recent example was the tariff tantrum. The next major market driving theme is shaping up to be how the bond market responds to the 5% level of the 30-year bond, and potentially the 10-year bond shortly thereafter. In the same way that the tariff theme was filled with surprising news, a rise and fall of investor anxiety, and unexpected market reactions, this process will repeat with the bond market as the culprit. The bond market played a big role in the tariff tantrum by being the voice that is widely believed to be the impetus for Trump deciding to pause the most aggressive tariffs. Another interesting point. While the tariffs' impact on the stock market in the near term may have been downgraded to a manageable headwind, the bond market remains poised to create waves in the stock market, and the next reprieve for stocks may not be as easy as getting the president to change his message. So there's a lot to get from this article, but one, as I said, the point of the theme of the day, and this has always been the way the market looks. For years, as a footnote, the market said, the Fed is going to lower rates, so that drove the market higher. For those years, 2.5 years, I said, no, they're not. And Wall Street Hackers was right about that one. But that theme just drove the market. The second point is we are at a critical moment in terms of rates in the markets. Higher rates create competition for stocks, and also they create stress on companies because they have the cost of capital. So they have to issue bonds at a higher rate, or they have to go borrow from banks at higher rates. So this is kind of a line in the sand in a sense, because today you could get over 5% in a long-term treasury, and I'll be discussing that during the investment suggestion part of our show. So coming up soon. So the bottom line is, if rates go up anymore, the stock market could really tank. It would be fear of inflation, fear of the rates going higher, and nobody really knows this for sure, although I will lean towards the fact it won't go higher. But nobody can be sure, and I'm not sure and that's the only thing I am certain of. So I would think the U.S. Treasury won't allow rates to go much higher, because it would put a lot of pressure on mortgage rates, a lot of pressure on the economy. But then again, I would have thought they already would have drawn the line, but maybe around 5 is where they will draw the line. That's my guess again. But this is a key theme in terms of how much you want to be in the market and how defensive you want to be. In other market news, gas prices hit a 4-year low around the Memorial Day weekend, which is a very good sign for inflation, despite the fear of tariffs, by the way, which will raise rates and put stress on companies. Will raise the price of things. Lower energy prices could offset a lot of that. Deregulation could. So there's a lot of parts moving around, and the tax bill could help the economy. So we'll see where all that goes. In other news, President Trump talked about a potential 50% tariff on the EU, which was because they have about a $250 billion trade surplus with the U.S. due to very unfair trade rules. Not all intentional, by the way. They have VAT taxes, but a lot of it probably is intentional. So all of a sudden now the EU has indicated more signs of being willing to negotiate, and Trump has said that he will delay any large tariffs, I believe, till July 1st. So, the tariff story is always changing, but in the end, I think he's doing the right thing. You need fair trade, not just world trade, but fair trade. Most interesting stories of the week. I was a little skeptical of Robert F. Kennedy's Jr.'s selection to Health and Human Services based on some things he has said, but he has done a pretty amazing job in a lot of areas, and especially in terms of making changes in the U.S. food supply. It's about time. The U.S. food supply has been deteriorating in terms of quality, as well as the world supply, for about 50 years now. I mean, more poisons, more chemicals, more dyes, less real nutrients in our foods, more sugar. It's, ongoing changes which have not been healthy for the U.S. or the world. He's obviously been working on reversing, allowing a lot of unnecessary dyes in foods and substituting healthier dyes, even though they're not as pretty. And also now he's talking about obesity in kids and sugar overload. We have such a big problem with ADD kids, and I think the sugar load and poor nutrition is probably a big factor there. But also a recent study said 75% of youth today, I don't remember the age group, but basically of young people, could not qualify for the militaries, for military service. And that's pretty sad. I mean, these kids need better nutrition. This week, more on this topic, a study by the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology, sorry if you're a beer drinker, found that 95% of 23 tested beers contain PFAs, which are also known as forever chemicals, which are very unhealthy. PFAs are not only common in foods, but also they're used in a lot of clothing for waterproofing. They're just prevalent in our society. The New York Post said today, I believe, or yesterday, I believe it was today's article, quote, with PFAS contamination affecting an estimated 200 million people in the U.S., the presence of these chemicals in beer underscores the broader issue of environmental pollutants infiltrating everyday products. it's about time that somebody start cleaning up the chemicals in America. This is one reason why there's so many health issues in America for certain. Why President Trump should still give me a call. So I'm going to go back to one. I have so many other ideas, by the way. I was going to talk about an innovative idea for prisons. There's so much, but I'm just going back to this one because it's becoming more and more obvious how right we were. About 7 or 8 weeks ago, I said that President Trump needs to put a lot more pressure on Putin as well as Zelensky in order to solve the Ukraine crisis. Well, this week, Trump called Putin, quote, crazy, and Congress is calling for harsher sanctions. So very little progress. President Trump is talking like he's defeated to a point. You know, he had promised a lot. My idea, which was pretty clear and I think will work, I'm not sure if sanctions will work, but this should work. Say to Putin, every 2 months from now forever, we will increase aid to Ukraine by 10 or 15%. How many cycles could he afford? He'll start losing the war. He'll be threatened by the war. He'll realize he can't win the war, and he can't anyway, probably. So we need peace, obviously, and that is the way to go. So somebody in the White House should give me a call sometime. I have a lot of ideas. Income investment of the week. First, we have to do our disclaimers. Wall Street Hackers is for entertainment only. These are only our opinions. There are no guarantees on our suggestions. Consult your financial advisor. So I was going to focus on a small allocation investment dividend stock, SRRTF, Slate Retail REIT, but I'm not going to focus on that this week. I'm going to cover it next week because it's a small allocation and because this morning you could get over 5% in a long-term high-yield treasury. So it's impossible to know where rates are going, or else you put every dollar on a bet one side or the other, maybe in futures. But here's why I like them and why I think they should be part of everybody's portfolio. But again, it depends on your age. It depends on your taste for risk. But I like them as part of a portfolio, absolutely, as a core part of a portfolio for safety. And I like high coupon long-term treasuries. And we'll get into that in a minute, why we like high coupons. But number one reason I like them is given the massive deficits and headwinds, the stock market may not even get a 5% return in the next 10 years. I base this on, among other things, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have forecasted 3 to 6% annualized returns over the next 10 years. So 3 to 6, if I can get 5 with no risk, that doesn't sound bad, especially inside an IRA or a 401k where maybe I can get some compounding if rates stay high. Another thing is, this is so logical, it's mathematical. There's only 3 directions rates can go. If rates go down, those 5% long-term bonds, long-term high coupon bonds will appreciate very substantially. They may very easily outperform the market. I mean, if you look at rates about 2.5 years ago, 3.5 years ago, right in that pocket, we were looking at 2%, 2.5% yields on treasuries. You wouldn't have dreamed of getting over 4, not to mention 5. So if rates if inflation gets under control, or if the government realizes, which they should probably already do, they need to get rates down, as the world does because of their massive deficits, U.S. and world, then they're going to try to force rates down with yield curve control. So if rates go down, you've got a 5% locked-in return with high coupons and income, and also you've got potential appreciation. If rates stay flat, then you're getting a decent 5% return, plus you can keep investing and reinvesting at around 5%, which will compound nicely over the years, and especially inside a 401k or an IRA if you're a U.S. investor. Now, if rates go up, that's the least appealing in a way for treasuries. But here's my points. Number one, if rates go up a lot more, the stock market could easily totally tank. I mean, if you look at the 70s, stocks for over 10 years were decimated with terrible returns, negative returns against inflation, negative returns, because, again, the pressure on companies, the disruption, and also the competition from higher rates. So I'd rather have a 5% return that's locked in if I never sell it, and just reinvest that at higher rates than potentially get slaughtered in the stock market. Again, I'm not saying what allocation you should have because it depends on your age, how much risk you like, but I definitely like that as one of my two core investments along with MPLX, and I love MPLX, as I've talked about it before, which is a limited partnership with growth and tax advantages for U.S. citizens, for U.S. Taxpayers. And so I'll take my risk with MPLX and my safety with treasuries. Those are the two core features. But then we're building around it a little bit with investments like Lamar, which was a very small allocation I discussed last week, I believe, and SRTF, which is a grocery REIT in Canada, which is better held than an IRA, but I'll get more into that. So it is an interesting time, and the rates in the near future will determine a lot in terms of where to be. And my guess again is that the rates are not going to go much higher. I don't think the Treasury will allow it, and also that rates probably will go down because the U.S. government and the world needs it. And if there's a lot of disruption in the economy, then rates will go down anyway. But we will see, because there's a lot of different forces impacting inflation and rates. So, panel discussion of the week, we're going to bring in Mark. Mark, are you there? I think Mark should be coming on. Here we go. Hi, Mark.
How's it going?
Mark is one of our regular commentators and moderators, and it's filling in for Nick this week, and will be next week too, I believe. And
Yes.
So the question of the week is AI reliable? Will it be more reliable, or is it overhyped in terms of investments in Wall Street? So here's some quick background, then we'll get your opinion, Mark. Again, I'll repeat the question for you after I give you the audience some background. So AI has obviously been a major theme of the market. We were talking about themes before. Perfect example. AI drive the market. The Magnificent Seven booming through. That was the story for years. The other stocks barely moved for years, but AI drove the market. It was the theme of the day. Then all of a sudden there was issues with Deep Seek, maybe questioning it, and also the Magnificent Sevens went so high that people started questioning how much was built into. This week, a report just said Amazon software engineers say AI is transforming their work, not by replacing them, but by pressuring them to code faster, meet higher output targets, and rely more heavily on tools they don't fully control. So that's interesting. AI, we're going to rely on AI to create AI, but we don't fully control it. Many companies have found in the last year and beyond that AI has created savings for them, but many others, and a significant portion, I don't know what the cut is, maybe it's 50-50, but many have cut back on their AI budgets or finding very marginal or no benefits from their AI investments. So it's been a mixed bag in terms of performance so far. So, Mark, questions are, is AI reliable? Will it be reliable? Or is it overhyped in terms of the market and investments? What do you think?
Well, I think AI is definitely a force. I'm seeing a lot of people using AI. I live around the corner from a major university, that being Duke University. And I know a lot of students are using ChatGPT and other things to even write their paper. So it does have some things that are...
get in trouble for that, Mark.
There's some things that are scary in that sense, because a lot of times the professors don't even know or aren't aware and everything. And one of our other moderators on the show actually brought up something that was quite interesting, because apparently AI is now developing a sense of being able to be in control, and maybe even having some greater control. Because Rick Rosner, who is on our World Edition and has his own show, Naked at Night, as well as some other shows, he brought up this notion that there have been some examples of AI, and I think it was one specific example of actually blackmailing people. So they knew about the person's affair or something like an affair and everything. And when it was getting ready to get shut off, it told the person that if it shut it off, it would then turn around and reveal what it knew about people. So this,
oh my gosh, AI is a blackmailer. That's a new function.
Yes, it's a new approach. AI is now actually doing blackmailing. This story has been circulated not just by our own, by others as well. So AI may have more control than we wanted to. And I go out and eat way too much, and I'm not sure that I'm ready for a AI waiter. I actually went earlier today to my eyeglass doctor, and he had a lot of equipment. I didn't see any of it that was using AI, but because there was a rain, I stopped by one of our local restaurants and had a live waiter that took care of me and all my needs as I was getting my food, some pad thai and everything like that. But I don't know how I would feel if a little robot dog came and wanted to take my order and everything like that. So I know that they're out there, but I don't know how I would feel about giving that order to that particular part of what can be AI. But apparently, according to Kim and others, it's what's coming. So we may have more AI than we are expecting and all along those lines. But
I can handle maybe. So, well, you brought up several interesting points. One, in terms of those papers, just be careful, because I know a professor who checks, and it's very easy for a professor to use a program. I don't know if it's AI or not, but it's very easy for a professor to check whether something is copyrighted, is copied from something else now. It's super easy for them to check it. There are programs like that. So you use AI for paper, you may get expelled, or you're going to get 0 on your paper for sure. In terms of restaurants, by the way, I talked about it on Wall Street Hackers, the most interesting story of the week, a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3. There's a restaurant in Florida, I think it's Fort Lauderdale, that has robots serving people. So what happens is, first a robot comes to the table and takes your order, and then a different robot busses your food to your table. And I think there's going to be more of that. Certainly there's going to be more of sit down at your table and order online. And then in terms of the blackmail, that's just amazing, but that shows how much it's not in control at this time. So here are my conclusions. One, AI is definitely, I don't think it's there yet, and it's unreliable in many ways. And this can be shown, first of all, by so many examples that probably many people have read about in newspaper articles or whatever, where people ask AI questions and they just come up with crazy examples, where you say, this is just history rewritten, this is ridiculous. This is not correct. And I've researched things with AI itself and said, that's totally wrong. It's even maybe 180 degrees wrong. Plus, AI isn't there because I know it saves companies money when you first call in, because they identify you. So that does save them money. They ask for your phone number, your email address, and by the time you get in there, usually the person who gets on the phone says, okay, I know who you are. Although today I had the experience of AI checking me, and then he had to check me again. It's like, that didn't work. But the other thing is, once you go beyond some basic functions like that, how many times do I and everybody sit there fighting through the AI to get to a human to really ask the question? Because AI barely understands you. And even if they understand you, they have no capability at all of answering the question. When they finally understand the words, they come up with an answer. It's like, that's not even what I asked. It's like, so AI is a ways to go. But the other side is, it's going to change society, and but it's going to be incremental. And I think probably that, Wall Street is overestimating now that rate of change. Amazon, I like, of all the companies in Google, because they make a lot of money on advertising anyway. Yeah. But a lot of the other AI successes that they're built into the Wall Street estimates are probably overmatched, overestimated. But there will be incremental benefits, and eventually there will be big change. That's the other thing.
I know you're wrapping up and everything, but I do have a quick kind of side question,
sure,
and all along to the lines to that fix. As you know, I'm in the event space, and definitely I know that you are in the Northeast. We won't say where and everything, but you get a chance to go to some amazing shows and all along those lines. So do you ever have a fear of not being able to see the artist that you like, whether it's a jazz artist or a blues artist or something like that, because it won't be the actual concert? Because I know that that's a concern among some of the musicians and theater people, is this fear that AI may actually wind up doing the show. We know that after Michael Jackson died, there were a number of hologram concerts, which was not him, but it was almost like a version of AI. And the same when Prince passed.
That's a great question. I mean, again, this is only a guess because nobody knows exactly when AI is taking over, and when the Terminator begins or whatever. So here's a few points. One, I think the acting industry is more threatened than music, because I think they're going to have images that are going to act well, and those images will look great, and they will be able to cut millions and millions of dollars out of budgets and just say, okay, look, we have. I mean, they've been doing this already for years with some characters, but I think it'll be more and more prevalent. So in terms of music, I don't think as much, and I'll tell you why. Because one, if people wanted to hear a record, or a tape, they could just go now. You can, you're paying to see the live performance. You're seeing the live, acting and lights and, dancing. And also you want to hear the music and feel like it's authentic. Again, I could get a, tape machine or a record player, which has, actually better quality sound, and put it on in a concert hall, but I don't think many people are going to show up for that concert. So I think people like to get out too, of to go to real live events for the excitement. And so it's a great question, but I think AI probably go after the acting industry first and a lot of those jobs. But music, I think they'll always be there. That's my guess. But we are running out of time. Yeah. My only other conclusion there is overall on AIs, there will be big changes. And the biggest change where a lot of these companies will make money is when they finally develop household robots. They're already doing the industrial, and there's a lot going on with chips and industrial robots. But someday, maybe 10 years from now, you're going to be able to have a robot in your house, which will affect the elder care industry. It's going to affect a lot of industries, maybe housekeeping industry. If they get to the point where that robot can come into your house and do all those things well, but people are going to have to also trust the reliability of that. It's a ways off. Right now, I wouldn't let one in my house. So thanks, Mark. We'll conclude with, as Kim always says, get healthy and get wealthy. Thanks for watching Wall Street Hackers. We'll be on next Tuesday following Lawyers Den around 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday, and Wall Street Hackers around 6:15. Good luck with your investing. Bye for now. Bye, Mark. See you next week.